And welcome to Capital Talk, a program we hope will have an impact on the future of Kenya. Now, more than ever, I'm Jeff Koinange. Now, if you've been watching Capital Talk all this week, you know that we are talking to my generation. That's right, those in their 30s and 40s, because that's what the future of this country is all about, especially where we are now, with the referendum at hand, with the yeses and the nos. And you've seen our guest this week. I tell you, it's confusing. But bottom line, you have to read that Constitution yourself. My guest today, whoa, sit back. This young man knows a thing or two about just about everything. You name it. Constitution, TJRC, the referendum, even the British elections. Why? Studied to be a lawyer, even was a barrister for a while. He knows his law. In fact, he also ran for parliament the last time in Mogotio. He's from the Rift Valley. You guessed it. My man knows what he's talking. He's also the chairman of the Kenya Land Association.
Kenya Landowners and Land Users.
Kenya Landowners and Land Users Association. We're talking land. Remember what William Ruto said the other day? Let's see what Chris Foote has to say.
Jeff,
Chris,
thank you very much.
Welcome to the bench.
Oh, good to be here.
Good to see you.
Very, very good.
Looking good too.
It's two of us.
Okay. Chris, William Ruto was on the bench the other day, Chris,
Yeah.
and I tell you, I was very confused because especially when it comes to land, and let's tackle land first in this new constitution. There are a lot of landowners out there, big landowners. People who have lots of land and don't use it. What's it called? It's been lying fallow for years.
Yeah.
The government will be able to take back some of that land if I'm to read this constitution right. And if not, taxes will have to be imposed on landowners.
Yeah.
What about small landowners as well?
Well, Jeff, I think this is the big concern we have. Large landowners who are not using land, I think we all agree, use it or lose it. Our recommendation would be tax it, and if they can't pay the taxes, they'll sell it. That's what the markets do. Our biggest concern is this article no one has discussed. It's in the property rights section in the Bill of Rights. And Article 40, subsection 3A, 43A. Have a look at it. People haven't been looking at it.
Yeah.
All the analysis has been on the minimum acreages and all of that stuff. And what that says, and this is the most worrying thing in the Constitution, it basically says the government can take your land without compensation. Now, that is not something that people have read and people understand, and it's very concerning because currently under Section 75 of the Constitution, we're in line with Western democracies all over the world. The government takes your land, they must compensate you timely at market values. Somebody snuck in Section 43A, which basically says as they work out the land chapter, they don't have to compensate you. Now, that is a complete anathema to 21st century democracy, and no one is talking about it, Jeff. And the question is, why aren't they talking about it? What's very interesting was the PSC in Navasha removed it. And you remember the PSC was a consensus-based agreement between all the parties. They removed it. Somebody in committee of experts, and we know who controlled the committee of experts, put it back in. Now, our concern is, why would a 21st century government seek to sneak in a clause that says the government can take your land, whether you're a smallholder or a large-scale farmer, without compensating you? And that is what concerns me.
That's not right, though. That's not right. If they're not going to compensate you, why would they take your, especially if you're a small holder, or were they referring to the large landowner who has tens of thousands of acres of land that they're not doing anything with?
Yeah, but the problem is, with the Constitution, that is the highest law in the country. And our concern is, of course, we could have a magnanimous state who would say, oh, well, we're only going to use that like a scalpel with the right people. But we do not trust the state enough to give them that broad remit and say, run with it. What happens if we have some Mugabe-like creature who says, well, in the Constitution, it says I can take your land, smallholder or not, without compensating you? And the issue is they could do it to resettlement schemes. They could do it to this minimum maximum acreages when they're going to tell people in Kisii, well, the minimum acreage you can have is this amount. You explain that to some guy in Kisii and you're not going to compensate him for it? It'd be a nightmare. Conversely, how do you define what his maximum acreage is? For a pastoralist who grazes cattle over 20, 30,000 acres, that's very different to somebody in Central who wants to, farm 5 acres of potatoes.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very dangerous precedent. And what we're concerned is who put it in there and why did they overturn the PSC on that one issue? Because I think most of us would say the rest of the Constitution on land we can work with. But to have a caveat there where the government can take your land without constitution, and I wish the media would start talking about that rather than minimum maximum acreages and foreign land ownership, that's all secondary. And why it's got that far without somebody flagging it concerns me.
Is this the biggest fear right now? And I'm sure some of your friends are voicing this fear, especially the European Union, which was supporting this draft all along. Up until last week, they held a press conference and they said, you know what, maybe the old constitution is a little better.
Well, I'm neutral on the Constitution at the moment, although I'm increasingly going down the avenue, which is if you don't know, vote no. That would be my thoughts at this moment. The reason the foreigners have reason to be concerned is the provision about foreign land ownership. Now, foreigners aside, how does it affect Kenyans? The way they've defined foreign, they've said if you're a foreign PLC, so any Kenyan company, pension fund, bank, which has one shareholding by a foreigner is considered foreign. If you're doing a joint venture with a foreigner, your land is now considered foreign. If you're married to a foreigner, your land is now considered foreign. If one of your children is foreign and you give him land with the other children, that land is now considered as foreign. And basically, when you're saying we're going to reduce your interest without compensating you, and it's academic, whether it's freehold or to 99 years, the principle is if you're reducing without compensating, we're breaching international law, international treaties, we're breaching COMESA, we're breaching the EAC, we're breaching the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, Article 14. We're going to be sued to hell and come. And it's ridiculous. Who will pay for that? You and I as taxpayers. And have they thought it through? And I suspect most of them haven't, and there's a few who, very Machiavellian, know exactly what they're doing. And that's what concerns me, Jeff.
From freehold to 99 years, Chris, what is wrong with that? I mean, 99 years is what? Several generations.
You see, the principle, I don't think many people have an issue with that, 99 years. The problem is they have not said explicitly in the Constitution, one, what your new conditions on that lease will be. They could give you a lease back with the most ridiculous conditions, which you couldn't fulfill. You forfeit your land. Secondly, they have not mentioned once in the Constitution about renewing that lease. Now, everyone is coming out saying, oh, well, we'll renew it. If you're going to renew it, put it in the Constitution. Don't leave it up to the benevolence of the state to say, oh, well, don't worry, we will renew it. We don't trust the state, period. The third issue is what happens if you're on 20 years left of your lease, okay, and you want to sell that house, and you don't know it's going to be renewed. The value of that house you're trying to sell in Milimani, Parklands, Karen, which are all 999-year leases, is hugely diminished. If you're a bank and you want to foreclose on a property where somebody's failed to pay the mortgage, and suddenly you've got 15 years left on it, and you want to go and realize the value of that property on market rates, you're going to get a fraction of what you're getting. And I just can't understand why the banking sector is so mute about this. But these are things which no one has thought through, and the ones who have thought it through have got a very, I think, very worrying agenda.
Is that why the no's are growing? Not just this, but issues like this that have been left out sort of intentionally?
I think what's happened is, the way I look at it is, the no's are growing because people are looking at the process that we arrived at this. And basically, a lot of people are saying this process was not democratic. We ended up with a constitution which 12 or 14 unelected consultants, I'm not going to call them experts because I doubt that, ended up giving us a constitution. They trumped Parliament. Parliament, who, whether you like them or not, are the representatives of the people, were trumped by this constitution. And what annoys me most, and a lot of people, is they knew from day one there was going to be issues with the church over both abortion and the Qadi courts. And they knew there was going to be issues with land users. And yet, from day one, they were not prepared to make one concession on those issues. And they could have, and they should have sought out the church from day one and said, the church represents 70% of this country. Let us build consensus with you over these issues, rather than having the arrogance to say, Lazma, we're going to push it through, and the church be damned and land users be damned. Because now, even if the constitution goes through, you're going to end up with probably 40% of this country who feel marginalized and disenfranchised that this is not their constitution. And how the politicians will deal with that will be even more divisive than if we just said, listen, let's go slowly and build consensus. So I do put the blame fairly and squarely on the committee of experts.
Could we have been so blinded by them, Chris? Come on. I mean, we're smarter than that. And yet, a lot of people are praising this as the best thing since sliced bread.
Jeff, I think, how many people actually read the Constitution? One. It wasn't even in Swahili the first time round. So how many people in Kenya read English and can read the legalese in a constitution? Two, how many people actually understood it? And don't get me wrong, there's some wonderful provisions in this constitution which I can only commend. And I just wish we'd taken the time to build a consensus to go forward with unity as a country.
So we rushed.
We rushed it, and the donors put unrealistic time schedules on it. The principals have alternative agendas which, trust me, have nothing to do with national interest. And we've rushed this thing through, and I'm afraid it's going to come back and haunt us. I really believe that.
Wow. Where do we go from here, Chris? I mean, obviously, August 6th or whatever that date is not that far away. There's going to be a lot of civic education between now and August. So we're throwing this thing right in the deep end and saying, okay, guys, go for it.
Well, I think you've got a point there. This issue about civic education. Civic education should be about what are the pros and cons of this constitution so the one-inch can make an informed decision. What civic education has become, with the donor money and with the money given to the committee of experts and so forth, is it's purely propaganda for the yes side. And that is the most undemocratic thing. We should be saying one-inch, these are the good things, these are the bad things, you the people decide. What we're doing is we're saying, this thing is amazing, vote yes. And that's not civic education, that's propaganda. So I'm concerned, Jeff.
That's a great point. You spoke about the principles a moment ago, Chris. And we've seen a situation in the UK. I just want to jump to the UK real quick because it's been a fascinating couple of weeks, or maybe 1 week since they held their elections. The guy who came in second stayed on as prime minister for a few days, while consensus or coalition governments were being formed. In the end, he stepped down, I guess for the right reason. And there's a government now between the two most unlikely parties, Conservatives and the Lib Dems. Chris, I mean, is this poetic justice? Is this civilization? Is this democracy at work? Tell me.
Well, Dave, I found it amusing because, and I said to the British actually last week, I said, you know, our concern as Kenyans obviously is that Nick Clegg will have a news blackout and he'll appear with the Chief Justice and announce himself as the Prime Minister. You know, and I said we could send you Kriegler and we've got some experience on this, we could help you.
Yeah, and lots of hockey yetu.
Quelli evil. But you know, they didn't find that too amusing. But the very same point there, which is you've got two political parties from diametrically opposing political views and ideologies who've decided to work together. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I tell you what, it's part of this new progressive politics that we need in this country, which is they've put aside their party differences and they've said what is good for the national interest. And I think that is one of the fundamental differences between their coalition and our coalition, which is, I think, anyone who's been following it in UK, the fact that Lib Dems and the Conservatives have united cannot doubt it's for national interest. I don't think for 1 second anybody could say the PNU coalition was anything to do with national interest. It was partisan and individual interests. And I hope one day we get to a situation where we get to that. Of course, they're going to have issues over Europe. They're going to have issues over electoral reform, which will have to happen. But on the core issues, reducing the deficit, they've agreed they're going to work on that. On issues to do with identity cards and all of that, they've agreed on that. And I think it will work. And I think it will work. And it sends a message to the world that actually this nonsense of first past the post, winner takes all, partisan politics is yesterday's news. You know, we've got so much more in common, we find, with, you know, what I would say the centrist group than we haven't got in common. And so let's work together. And I think it would work. I really believe that.
Okay, you said we have a lot to learn from them. Can they learn from us? I want you to think about that over the break. Can they learn a little bit from our so-called grand coalition? And what an irony, because even Zimbabwe now is a coalition government, their biggest enemy, and vice versa. And also TJRC, I know you have your thoughts on Kiplagat and the whole healing process, but first let's take a break. Chris Foot, my goodness, I told you, our generation is speaking up and speaking out. They're speaking from the heart and they know what's good for this country. And Chris says at the end of the day, civic education is about presenting the pros and cons, not propaganda. Whoa! The bench is steaming this week, I tell you. Don't even think of going away. Capital Talk is back in a moment. And welcome back to Capital Talk. I tell you, this young man, I told you from the start, he's got brains and brawn, and he knows what he's talking about. We're talking everything from the Constitution to the referendum to the UK elections and everything in between. Chris Foot. So, can they learn from us? Can they learn? Yeah.
I think they can learn a lot of things. Perhaps not in the political arena. I'm afraid not. I mean, in terms of the other aspects to our culture, the community aspect, the way we look after the poor and marginalized within our communities, they could learn an awful lot. I think politically, I'm afraid we are the Neanderthals on this particular issue, and I can say that unashamedly. You know, what value have most of our politicians added to this country? And I think most people would say they've added very little value. And they're bloody expensive, and I'm afraid in terms of bang for their buck, they work for me, I'd sack most of them. There's some very good ones, but I really don't think there's much they could learn from that. And I think the day this country has leadership that is visionary, has moano marefu, and they see beyond their own vested interests and that of their tribe and their party, this country will fly. I really believe God has got an amazing anointing for this country to use us in the region to bless the region. But we need to end up with leadership that has vision, has a heart, has integrity. And I'm afraid at the moment we're lacking in all of that.
Yeah. Speaking of visionary leadership, Chris, the TJRC, Bethwell Kiplagat has been through hell and back as chairman because of some very mundane excuses. And they have not allowed him to do his job. I mean, TJRC is dead in the water as we speak. And we have to heal, Chris. At the end of the day, what happened here from 90 or even from independence? We have not healed. We have to heal. No. Was it a tough blow on him?
I think Bethel Kiplagat has acted with the dignity and magnanimity that fits somebody of his position. And it's shameful the way he's been lynched by this mob of a small section of civic society. And I think if you were to look at their vested interests as to why they decided to hang Bethel Kiplagat out to dry, most of them thought they were going to get positions they didn't get. Most of them are controlled by political masters and they want to use the TJRC to settle scores or quit people. Others perhaps thought there's a whole lot of money, they're going to get 190 million shillings and they all think there's a dollar to be earned there. And Bethel Kiplagat would be the one person who's got integrity, who would say no to that. He's somebody who the people, just take the Rift Valley as an example, they are going to be in the dock over the post-election violence, our community, quite rightly so. Now, if there is not a senior member who's respected of the Kalenjin community there, the TJRC will be dead in the water because they will say this is a witch hunt against the Kalenjin. Okay, Bethel Kiplagat, international mediator, Mozambique, Somalia, Sudan. He was the first guy when the post-election violence happened who set up Citizens for Concerned Citizens for Peace. And he said, no, we will stop this. And he's got the integrity for it. And these jokers come up with these things on Wagala massacre. He was on the, the National Security Council, which meets once a month in Nairobi to discuss everything. The VP chairs it, it has all the PSs there. There wasn't a suggestion he was involved in that. Then they mentioned the fact he's mentioned the Ndunga report. In Ndunga report, I guarantee you most of you viewers are probably in that. They're not knowing it. It was a recommendation to explore these properties, neutral stuff. Then there's these other issues they've brought up, which it's pernicious, it's trite, it's irrelevant, and it's just fundamentally it's just disingenuous the way they've tried to nail him. And it's a tragedy because you will not be able to replace him. And I guarantee whoever goes to replace Kiplagat will get chuppered just as badly. And this guy is respected, and I've got a lot of time for him. And the Truth and Justice Reconciliation Committee needs to get out there, do their work, and I hope they are doing it, because they need to get up there, they need to go to Wagala for a start, go to Kitale or Eldoret, start the work. People will start seeing that you're doing it. We need to have this catharsism as a country over what happened. I agree we shouldn't bury it. It must be dealt with, and Bethel Kiplagat's the perfect guy for that job.
But that's the thing about us Kenyans, Chris. We are such haters. You know, we shoot first and ask questions later.
Yeah. I think you're right, Jeff, and I think we're an angry country at the moment. There's been so many injustices, and our generation we're an angry group. We're very angry. And I think the Constitution is an angry document. And and that is also not a good reason to go forward. I think we need to, as a nation, start some healing. And I think the churches have got a huge role to do in this. I believe politicians have a huge role to play in it. But fundamentally, this anger that we have must go, because it's destructive. And as you know, with anger and bitterness, it only destroys yourself. And I think we need to start the healing process. And I would love to see politicians reaching out to the other side and saying, what is our progressive way of dealing with the issues of this country?
And
Jeff,
country first, right?
Country first, Jeff. And I would, I think you and I could probably name 10 politicians who genuinely think country first, as opposed to tribe, as opposed to party, as opposed to money.
Yeah.
And, I'm not telling the viewers anything they don't know. They know that. They're as cynical about the politicians as we are. And I think we just need to change that.
Yeah. Let's look ahead, Chris. Let's just, for a moment, let's look ahead towards the referendum.
Yeah.
Let's say the no wins. Let's say the no wins. What happens, Chris?
I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion. I think we should go back and start making fundamental changes through legislation, through enabling legislation, through implementing legislation. The current constitution isn't that bad. It protects a lot of rights, and a lot of the rights are protected universally and under treaties. And also, we can amend the current constitution. You know, it's very easy. Fundamental things, you'll get 75% of people voting in the House saying the police must produce a person if they've arrested him. No one's going to stop that. And I think what we need to do is start saying, what are the key issues affecting this country? How do we look after the poor? How do we look after the marginalized? At the same time, maintain a context and environment that people can invest in and create wealth. And fundamentally, I believe in wealth creation. And I don't believe it's very easy to take away other people's rights, but fundamentally, you create a context where people who make money can make money, and the state looks after the poor and the marginalized and provides defense and education and health.
Yeah.
Period.
Let's look on the other side, Chris. The yeses win.
Yeah. Yeses win. I think it's quite likely they will win. I think the big concern is, what do you do with the 30 to 40% of people who voted against the Constitution, who feel marginalized, disenfranchised, and who basically say, well, this ship is leaving port without us. What do you do? And I think politicians will realize that they might have made a mistake. And I am concerned about it. I don't think, by the grace of God, we'll ever end up with the post-election violence that we had, for a number of reasons. I think whoever wins the next election will win by more than 5%, so there won't be that concern as to, oh, who won, who lost. The 1 inch are fed up for having been the henchmen of the politicians. They realize they gain nothing by the violence. The international community will be watching them like hawks, so some of the politicians will realize that they'll be slapped down very shortly afterwards. So I don't think we'll end up in that situation. But the question is, how can we end up at 2012 with a government that takes this country forward, builds it up, and does the people of this Kenya a service? I don't know, Jeff. Yeah.
Okay, speaking of international community, Ocampo's been in town all this week, right?
Yep. Not that I've met him, anyone, in case you're watching.
Right. Your thoughts, Chris, because he's got his people on the ground. He says in 6-7 months he's going to be making some arrests, and some fundamental arrests, Chris, because obviously the perpetrators, the ringleaders of the post-election violence, have to end up in The Hague at some point, whether they like it or not.
I agree with you, Jeff, and I think the impunity that these guys enjoyed whilst they went around inciting this country to violence and taking us to the end needs to be dealt with, 100%. And I think provided due process is followed and procedural propriety is there, I think it will be good. I think the big concern of a lot of people is, why did they draw the line at a particular level? And I'll let you read into that. I think there needs to be a question of, why didn't they go lower? Why didn't they go higher, perhaps? And I think the question is, who were the main beneficiaries of the post-election violence? And that is the question I'll leave open and floating. But if I come to your house, Jeff, and I find you have a TV that belongs to me, and I hope this metaphor works, you need to answer how you got that TV. You know what I mean? Yep. You don't just nail the guy who stole it.
How did I get it?
How did you get it? And you have to explain that, because it also sets a precedent. And you can have a very legitimate reason for that. But I think due process needs to be followed. I believe that the problem is with the ICC, the process is phenomenally long, and their success rate has been pretty minimal. And it was an interesting dilemma for Kenyans, which is, on one hand, we're saying we can't deal with this ourselves. On the other hand, we need it to be dealt with. So maybe we should have had a local tribunal, but a lot of people doubted its integrity and veracity and whether it could actually perform. Yeah. On the other hand, it sends a message to the world that we can't sort out our own problems.
Correct. Will it have to be balanced, Chris? You know, because a lot of people have been asking this question. Will Ocampo have to take a couple from the Rift Valley, a couple from Central, maybe one from the coast, one from Western? Will it have to be balanced so that we're not divided any further than we already are as a nation?
I think on that issue, the balance issue is not so important. I think the perpetrators should be dealt with, irrespective of the ratios involved. However, if you look at the violence that happened, of course, the most amount of violence carried out was in the Rift Valley. Violence happened everywhere, and I think it's not rocket science to show that so many different communities were involved in that violence, and their modus operandi might have been very different, but they were there. And whether it was I won't go into some of the details, but we all know how the different communities got involved with it and how they sanctioned it, how they encouraged it. And some were throwing sticks and stones and some were using the police. It's there. I don't think there's any need to say, well, let's get different groups. I think you say, who are our top 20 people of all shades, and let's put them through the courts and see. Most will be acquitted. Some will be, will go through and be charged and hopefully found guilty. And I don't think anyone's got a problem with that.
Yeah. At the end of the day, can we heal from this? Can we move forward, more importantly, from this? Because going back to 07, 08, Chris, this is going to take this country back 50 years.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jeff. And I think one of the biggest things we need to do as a country is look forward. And this is where I have some concerns about the historical injustices issue in land and in various other things. Is you cannot go forward, you cannot drive a car looking in the rear mirror. Sometimes you have to say the past is the past, we put it behind us. One of the founding tenets of the AU was we will now draw a line in the past in terms of boundaries, let's just go forward. And I think as a country we need to do that. I think Kenyans are good and bad in terms of we forget the past. It's a good thing sometimes, it's a bad thing sometimes. And I think we need to learn from the past, move forward and let the past be the past.
Yeah.
Because where do we go? Do we go back to injustices since independence, injustice committed by the colonialists, justice committed by the Warabu, injustice committed by the people who are against the communities who are here in the 1700s? Where do you go? And I think there comes a time where we say, let's have this limited period of time to set a precedent that we will never forget injustice, but now let's move forward.
Yeah. Speaking of the past, your past experience in Mogotio, running for office, was that good fun and would you do it again?
Good fun, no. Just anyone who's aspiring to be a parliamentary candidate, it's not fun. It's rewarding. I met some wonderful people, and it really enabled me to see how people live in the rural areas in Kenya and what their needs are. Would I run again? I'm praying about it. Who knows? Maybe a Senate post, maybe president one day. But no, we'll see.
You never know.
You never know.
I mean,
Jeff.
there's some guy in Washington, D.C. who,
Yeah, there's a guy who's a 0.5, half Kenyan, former lawyer, and he's president of some country out there.
Bingo.
Jeff, you've just put an idea in my head. So we'll see. But I'm going to think and pray about it. I think I definitely have a heart to get involved in changing this country. I think politics is a very good way of doing it. There is a dearth of good leadership. But there's other ways. You can do it through business and philanthropy. You can do it through law. You can do it through civic society. So there's other avenues, and I think we just need to. I'm going to take stock over the next month or two.
Keep praying, my brother, and good luck.
Thank you very much.
We need people like you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Good.
0.5.
0.5, I'm proud of it.
Chris Foot, my goodness, I tell you, Kenya's future is bright. The likes of Chris Foot are out there doing their thing. They want to make a difference. They want to make a change, and they're not afraid of losing. He lost out the first time around. He says he would do it again for the sake of the country. Bottom line, country first, everything else second. Whoa! I told you, the bench this week was no doubt the place to be. You cannot find these kinds of guests anywhere else but right here on the award-winning station, K24, where as always, we are, even if we're in the Rift Valley, all Kenyan.
All the time. Jeff, thank you very much.
Splendid.
That was fun.
It was fantastic. Capital Talk is recorded at the Fairview Hotel, the country hotel in town.